Discover the small Illinois town with a big paranormal history.
Witness the reluctant psychic who can see more blindfolded than you can without one.
Marvel at the desperate family who sought help from the ethereal other side.
Plus unruly spirits, leeches, and a plot twist that will have the back of your head touching your heels.
It will entrance you.
It will possess you.
It will befit you to drink heartily the mysterious elixir that is Odd Tonic.
Welcome to the parlor, dear guest. I'm Jennifer.
And I'm Maxwell. We're pleased that you've joined us today. And we have a very special show planned for you. Jennifer and I will investigate the strange and tragic case of Mary Roff, the astonishing teenage psychic from 1864, while interweaving it with
the seemingly impossible yet widely substantiated miracle of Lorancy venom, forever remembered as the Watseka Wonder.
Now, just a quick note. Odd Tonic is crafted so that if it happens to be reaching younger ears, you won't have to dive for the off switch. You can generally remain comfortable while sharing our weird content with your family of weirdos. If a story requires us to dip into extra scary or distressing subject matter, we will let you know at the top of the show.
That said, we want to just let you know that this week's story includes a moment in which we very lightly, very quickly, and non-graphically touch on the subject of self-harm. We understand that some guests might be sensitive to the subject, and we just want to give you a heads up.
Indeed. We also want to take a moment to thank you for the lovely Odd Tonic reviews and recommendations that you've left on our Facebook page.
They mean the world to us. It's more exhilarating than running through a haunted hedge maze at midnight, so thank you for that.
Okay. Are you ready?
I'm breathless. Or that could be the corset. Either way, I'm ready.
All right, let's dive in.
Mary Roff was born to parents Aja and Ann Roff on October 8, 1846 in Warren, Colorado. At the fragile age of 6 months, she became sick and had, in historical vernacular, a fit in which she remained for several hours. After her eventual recovery, these spells continued every 3 to 5 weeks, all the time increasing in force and in violence. In her 10th year, they increased to 3 or 5 episodes within 3 or 4 days. Between bouts, Mary became sad and despondent, and being a skilled pianist, she would sing and play solemn music. We Are Coming, Sister Mary, a favorite of hers, was often played. By the time she was 15 years old, Mary's family, which included brother Frank and sister Minerva, were residing in Watseka, Illinois, a small town 86 miles south of Chicago. The violence of Mary's fits had gotten worse, and her parents were becoming alarmed by the depression they caused in her. Several prominent doctors examined her and ultimately prescribed a water cure, in which she was kept for 18 months.
Now, dear guest, you might be wondering, what is a water cure? We found this quick entry on it on mentalfloss.com to keep us from going overly verbose. We like their write-up. This is what they say. Building off the idea that a dip in the water is often calming, psychiatrists of yore attempted to remedy various symptoms with corresponding liquid treatments. For instance, hyperactive patients got warm, tiring baths, while lethargic patients received stimulating sprays.
Not so much.
Some doctors, however, got a bit too zealous about the idea, prescribing therapies that sounded more like punishment. One treatment included mummifying the patient in towels soaked in ice-cold water.
Oh, no.
Another required the patient to remain continuously submerged in a bath for hours, even days, which might not sound so bad, except that they were strapped in and allowed out only to use the restroom. Finally, some doctors ordered the use of high-pressure jets. Sources indicate that at least one patient was strapped to the wall in the crucifixion position.
Never a good sign.
And blasted with water from a fire hose. Like many extreme treatments, hydrotherapy was eventually replaced with psychiatric drugs, which tended to be more effective.
I just question how they got from warm, tiring baths to high-pressure jets. How does that work? No comment.
No comment.
Unsurprisingly, the treatments did nothing. By the age of 18, Mary's spells had worsened and her depression deepened. Additionally, she developed a lump of pain in the head from which she sought relief by bleeding herself, a practice that fell into obsession. Doctors addressed both issues by prescribing leeches. Yeah, Mary reportedly treated them as little pets and happily applied them to herself directly onto her temples.
No!
Any relief they offered were short-lived. I imagine her leeches had little doily collars and Victorian roller skates. Her favorite was named Mr. Sippington, and he wore an ascot and a top hat.
I'm still trying to imagine a slug on roller skates.
I don't know how that works either. All joking aside, I mean, I feel for this girl. Never knowing when an excruciating seizure would start, she was not able to trust she could participate in probably the simplest of activities, or take comfort in social visits, or even have the closeness of friendships. I mean, her condition would not only violently possess her physically, it would possess her entire life.
Right.
When she should have been enjoying the bright young days of being a lovely young woman, Mary was chained to her dreary condition and grew up leading an isolated and bleak existence.
It's true. Must have been terrible for her.
It's just not fair. In a deeply despondent mood on the morning of July 1864, Mary cut her arm terribly. When they found her in the backyard, Mary was unconscious from an excessive loss of blood. She remained unconscious until 2 p.m., and upon waking, she was fiercely manic, raving with intense physical violence. She required the service of 5 of the most able-bodied men to hold her down, although her weight was only 100 pounds and she had lost an alarming amount of blood. Mary remained in this state for 5 full days and nights. So I do have to take a moment to pine for the bygone era in which 5 able-bodied men were just readily available. I mean, no one's building up that hay-baling, ice-block-hauling raw strength anymore. I don't know, maybe I'm wrong. Send your application to the parlor ad.
That's right. We got to get that Odd Tonic barn raised.
Yeah, we're putting on a show.
We're putting on a hootenanny.
When the episode finally ceased, Mary appeared to be no worse for wear. She rose and began going about her daily routine, but something was different about her. Something uncanny. Not only did she not seem to recognize anyone in her home, she did not recognize the presence of anyone either, even though the house was filled with people day and night. Mary was operating in a strange, clairvoyant state in which she had no sense of sight, feeling, or hearing in a natural way. Curious, doctors and other gentlemen in the home began testing her claims and were startled by the results. Under heavy blindfolds, Mary could accurately read books aloud. She would dress and stand before a mirror, open and deftly pluck items from drawers, and could quickly pick up loose pins from the floor. On another occasion, Mary took a box of letters received from friends and sat down. Heavily blindfolded by critical and intelligent witnesses, Mary examined and read the letters aloud without error or hesitancy. When some observers mingled a few of their own letters with Mary's, she proceeded at once to correctly draw out the foreign letters and examine them. If it was upside down, she would quickly flip it and read aloud its address. And then she tossed out every letter that was not her own and rearranged 20 or 30 letters in the order she desired. While also in this state, Mary spoke aloud to spirits that only she could hear. When editor A.J. Smith scoffed at this, Mr. and Mrs. Roth asserted their discovery that Mary could accurately read a random book with its cover closed while in this condition. To test this, Smith drew from his pocket a letter enclosed in an envelope. Holding it before her bandaged eyes, he said, "Mary, read the signature on this letter." The proper name was immediately pronounced.
Impressive.
Really? After 3 or 4 days of these remarkable feats, Mary returned to normal. But so returned her violent fits and the obsession with bloodletting. Her parents were ultimately convinced to place Mary in an asylum in Peoria. 1 year later, during a 3-day visit with her parents, Mary died after suffering a fit while in bed. She was 19 years old. And now, dear guest, as poor Mary Roth's strange life comes to a close, a much stranger story begins.
On July 16th, 1864, the very day that a despairing Mary Roth quietly took a kitchen knife into her backyard, Lorancy Venom was born just 7 miles south of Watseka. Coincidentally, 7 years later, the Venom family spent the summer living in a house merely 600 feet from the Roth residence, though communication between the families was rare and formal. By the next season, the Venoms had moved to the opposite side of Watseka. Approximately a week before her 13th birthday, Lorancy, or Rancy as she was nicknamed, said to her family, "There were persons in my room last night, and they called, 'Rancy, Rancy,' and I felt their breath on my face." The very next night she arose from her bed, saying that she could not sleep, that every time she tried to sleep, people again came and called her name. A few days later, Lorancy cried out, "Ma, I feel bad," fainted, and fell heavily to the floor of her home. She seemed dead, every muscle rigid, a state that lasted for 5 hours. The next day, the rigid state returned, along with a new strangeness. Her mind took cognizance of 2 states of being at once. Lying in a seemingly catatonic state, she spoke freely, telling the family of the people and spirits she could see, describing them and calling them by name. Among those mentioned were her belated sister and brother. "Oh, Mother, can't you see little Laura and little Bertie? They are so beautiful." Bertie died when Lorancy was only 3 years old. These rigid fainting spells continued, becoming more intense, and soon she was experiencing them 3 to 8 or even 12 times a day, sometimes for up to 8 hours. In these trances, she would describe seeing heaven and spirits, or the angels, as she called them. Sometime in September, the trance states finally broke, and she seemed to be back to normal. But in November, she was attacked by a violent pain in her stomach 5 or 6 times a day. In these painful spasms, she would double herself back until her head and feet actually touched. At the end of 2 weeks, while in these excruciating attacks, she would become unconscious and passed into a quiet trance. And, as before, would describe the non-corporeal world seen before her. Lorancy also began speaking in other people's voices, sometimes in foreign languages or garbled speech, describing faraway places and people in striking detail. These moments began to escalate, her personality changing as if she were possessed by other beings. Her behavior became wild and uncontrollable, sometimes having to be locked in a room. Her parents called in multiple physicians, none of whom could find anything wrong. Friends and relatives of the Venoms declared Lorancy to be insane. Reverend B.M. Baker, the Methodist minister in charge at Watseka, went so far as to contact the Peoria Asylum to determine if the girl could be received there. Mr. and Mrs. Venom were reluctant to the idea, but as Lorancy's behavior worsened and the pressure of friends and family increased, her exhausted parents were beginning to lose hope. Perhaps an asylum was the answer.
Ah, yes, the yellow wallpaper treatment. We can't figure out what's wrong. Let's lock her away until it sorts itself out.
But before Lorancy could be taken away, the Venoms received 2 visitors.
None other than Aja and Anne Roth. After Mary's death and to their terrible grief, the Roths had come to believe that Mary had not been insane, but a gifted, if misunderstood, spirit medium. They had also become spiritualists intent on communicating with their deceased daughter beyond the veil. They deeply regretted placing Mary in a sanatorium, something they could never forgive themselves for. They begged the Venom family and friends to withhold Lorenzi from the asylum until it could be determined if the girl really was insane, or if perhaps her condition might be attributed to foreign and manipulative entities. They believed a spiritualist physician could alleviate her symptoms and save her from the grim fate that had befallen dear Mary. Spiritualist physician? Cue the little medium lady from Poltergeist, right?
Right.
Spiritualism was one of the 19th century's most popular religious trends, a scattered but powerful movement of individuals who yearned for a religion that united mysticism and science. Spiritualism sought to unite the natural and the supernatural realms and to bring the dead into conversation with the living. A core belief that there was indeed life after death and that communication with those who had passed over was entirely possible.
After much persuasion, the Venoms agreed to a visitation from Dr. E. Winchester Stevens. Dr. Stevens visited the Venom family in January 1878, accompanied by Mr. Roth. They found Lorenzi sitting near the stove, her elbows on her knees, her hands under her chin, feet curled up on the chair, eyes staring, looking in every way like an old hag. Sullen and crotchety, she snapped at them and doled out abusive names for her parents.
Wow.
When Stevens asked her name, she replied, Katrina Hogan, giving her age as 63 and saying that she was from Germany. After this conversation proceeded for some time, the spirit decided to come clean and reveal that it was actually a man named Willie Canning, a local man who had recently committed suicide. Willie then started interrogating Stevens, asking whether he went to church, if he liked to smoke and drink, and became increasingly rude and belligerent.
Why you part your hair that way? Are you afraid of robots? Is that you that smells funny? Do you have an opinion on garden gnomes? Where do you see yourself in 5 years? I hate that one.
I hate that one too.
No one likes that one.
Eventually, having enough, the gentleman rose to leave, when Lorenzi fell to the floor, her arms upward and rigid. The visitors seated themselves again, and, with experienced skill, Dr. Stevens was soon in full and free communication with the calm and happy mind of Lorenzi Venom. She spoke to them with much sweetness, declaring herself to be in heaven. She apologized for having such evil influences about her, and said she knew of the evil spirit calling itself Katrina, Willie, and others. Stevens suggested that she look around her for a higher, purer, more intelligent spirit to control her. Lorenzi then said there were a great many spirits willing to come, and that one angel stepped forward, a young woman who professed to be able to help. When asked if she knew who it was, she said, "Her name is Mary Roth." Mr. Roth was floored. "That is my daughter," he said. "Mary Roth is my girl." Dear guest, we hope you are enjoying the Odd Tonic podcast. If you are, please just stop what you're doing right now and hit the subscribe button. And write us a kind review on iTunes or your favorite podcast app. It will really help us out.
And besides sending us gold doubloons, leaving us a positive review is probably the single most important thing you can do to support our show. And tell your weird friends about us, too.
Heck, tell your normie friends about us, and we will convert them to weirdos for you at no extra charge.
Bonus.
But if you want, you can pay us back by following us on Twitter and Instagram, and like us on Facebook, all at Odd Tonic Society.
Now back to our story.
Lorenzi, after due deliberation and counsel with spirits, said that Mary would take the place of the former wild and unreasonable entities. Mr. Roth said to her, "Have your mother bring you to my house. Through Mary's guidance and our experience and understanding of your condition, surely we can assist you and your family." An agreement was made. The following morning, Mr. Venom called at the office of Mr. Roth and informed him that the girl who had identified herself as Mary Roth wanted to go home. To quote, "She seems like a child real homesick, wanting to see her ma and pa and her siblings."
Lorancy's personality changed from the wild and ungovernable girl she had been in recent months to become mild, polite, and somewhat timid. The spirit called Mary explained to everyone that Lorancy was very ill and required some time away with the angels in heaven. There, Lorancy could be cured, and Mary would restore the health of Lorancy's body, while she spent time with her family. Lorancy, continuing to speak as Mary, claimed to know none of the Venom family, and she pleaded to go home. There was a real reluctance to allow Lorancy to leave the house, due to the Venom's fear of Lorancy relapsing back into her old, uncontrollable self, bringing terrible trouble to the Roths and potential social fallout to the Venoms. About a week after Mary's arrival, Miss Roth and her daughter Minerva went to see the girl. As they came in sight, far down the street, Lorancy looked out the window and exclaimed, "Here comes my ma and my sister Nervy," the name Mary used to call Minerva in girlhood. As they came into the house, she hugged them fiercely and wept and cried for joy. After that visit, the spirit of Mary became almost frantic with homesickness. Finally, friends of the Venoms insisted that they send the girl to the Roth house.
In February, Lorancy arrived at the Roths, where she met her ma and pa and each member of the family, with overjoyed expressions of love and affection. On being asked how long she would stay, she said, "The angels will let me stay until sometime in May." Now in her new home, she seemed perfectly happy and content, knowing every person and everything that Mary knew when in her original body, 12 to 25 years ago, recognizing and calling by name those who were friends and neighbors of the family from 1852 to 1865, calling attention to hundreds of specific incidents that transpired during Mary's natural life. Dr. Stevens documented many of these in his book, The Watseka Wonder. Here are some examples.
3 days after Lorancy came to the Roths, there came a moment when she looked at Mr. Roth with retrospection and asked, "Pa, who was it that used to say, 'Confound it'?" And she laughed heartedly when she saw that he understood it to be him, it being a common expression of his during Mary's girlhood many years ago.
One evening, while Mr. Roth was taking his tea indoors and Lorancy was out in the yard, he asked Mrs. Roth if she knew the whereabouts of a certain velvet headdress that Mary used to wear the last year before she died. Mrs. Roth did, and she put it near the front door, where it could be easily seen. When the girl soon came in, she immediately exclaimed, "Oh, there's the headdress I wore when my hair was short." She then requested to see her old box of letters, inside which she discovered a lace collar. "Ma, here's the collar I tatted," she said, as she went on to recognize and remember every small moment captured or inspired by the contents of the box.
I just love that, when my hair was short.
Yeah, nice detail.
Yeah. Some days after Mary was settled into her new home, Miss Parker, an old friend and former neighbor, came in with her daughter-in-law, Nellie Parker. As Mary, Lorancy immediately recognized both of the ladies, calling Miss Parker Auntie Parker and the other Nellie, as Mary had addressed them 18 years ago. In conversation with Mrs. Parker, Mary asked, "Do you remember how Nervy and I used to come to your house and sing?" Mrs. Parker was surprised, as this topic came from nowhere, having not been brought up by anyone in the room. Mrs. Parker described how Mary and Minerva, as small children, used to come to her house and sit and sing "Mary Had a Little Lamb." Minerva agreed, saying that she remembered it well.
When she was 11 years old, the Roths had moved to Victoria, Texas, to seek relief for Mary's condition. Mr. Roth asked Lorancy if she remembered the move or anything about it. "Yes, Pa," she said. "I remember crossing the Red River and seeing a great many Indians. And I remember Miss Eater's girls, who were in our company," and went on to disclose other incidents and facts that occurred years before Lorancy was born. Throughout Lorancy's stay with the Roths, the Venoms would often visit, though their daughter barely knew them. She did not recognize any of Mr. Venom's family or their friends and neighbors, being introduced to them as she would to common strangers. This magnitude of alienation and strangeness for the Venoms was never lost on the Roff family. Mr. Roff once described to Dr. Stevens a scene in which Lorenzi entered his business office, which was also occupied by his adult son, Frank. Lorenzi placed an arm around Roff's neck, kissed him, and said, "Pa, I am going with Miss Venom to visit today." Roff looked around and discovered Miss Venom standing in the door, looking on. The girl then bade an affectionate goodbye to Frank, while Roff watched the complex expression on Mrs. Venom's face. "You don't know how my heart aches for that poor mother," Roff confided to Stevens. Day by day, Lorenzi's physical health improved. At first, she did not eat with the family. Sitting down to the tea table on one occasion, Mrs. Roff asked, "Now, Mary, what shall I get you to drink?" She answered, "Oh, nothing, I thank you, Ma. I'm going to heaven for my tea." And off she went, into a quiet trance, or to, quote, heaven, as she termed it, and so remained until the family had eaten. When she returned, she was again offered tea. After Mary gently reminded them that she had already been to tea, she was asked, "Mary, what do you eat, and how do you eat it?" Her answer was, "Oh, Ma, if I could tell you, you could not understand it." For some time she only ate in that way, except a little occasionally to pacify her anxious family. As Lorenzi's body became stronger, she ate more freely. During her last days with the family, she ate, drank, and slept as a healthy person should.
On May 7th, just over 3 months after her arrival, Mary called Mrs. Roff to a private room. There in tears, she told her that Lorenzi Venom was coming back. She said she could not tell whether Lorenzi was coming to stay or not, and if she was, Mary wanted to see her sister again and bid her goodbye. Mary sat down, closed her eyes, and in a few moments the change took place, and Lorenzi had control of her own body. Looking wildly around the room, she anxiously asked, "Where am I? I was never here before." Mrs. Roff replied, "You are at Mr. Roff's, brought here by Mary to cure your body." She cried and said, "I want to go home." Mrs. Roff asked her if she could stay till her folks were sent for. She said no, as she still had a few remaining lessons with the angels. Within minutes, the change was made again, and Mary was overjoyed to find herself permitted to return. The moment called, as it often did, for Mary's playing and singing of her favorite song, "We Are Coming, Sister Mary." Mary was often overly affectionate with her family, having missed them for such a long time, and now getting to spend time with them, not hindered by her illness. She would say, "Nervy, my sister, put your arm around me," or "Come, Nervy, put your arm around me, and we'll take a little walk in the garden or the grove. For I cannot be with you much longer, and I want to be with you every minute I can." Lorenzi continued to demonstrate stunning detail of Mary's former life. In conversation about how in the past she had cut her arm, she proceeded to slip up her sleeve as if to exhibit the scar, but paused, as if by a sudden thought, and quickly said, "Oh, this is not the arm. That one is in the ground." She spoke to Mr. Roff about how she wrote to him a message some years ago through the hand of a medium, giving a name, a time, and a place. Also of rapping and of spelling out a message by another medium, giving all the details, which the parents admitted all to be true.
Fascinating. Yeah. While in Lorenzi's body, Mary demonstrated clairvoyant abilities as well. With much concern and anxiety, Mary declared that her brother Frank must be carefully watched the coming night, for he would be taken very sick and would die if not properly cared for. Frank was perfectly well at the time. At 2 o'clock in the morning, Frank became very ill with a congestive chill. Mary at once saw the situation she had predicted and asked for the family to send for Dr. Stevens. After the family explained that Dr. Stevens was away in Old Town, Mary corrected them and said that he was nearby with Mr. Marsh, uncannily knowing that the doctor's travel plans had changed late in the night. With Dr. Stevens' supervision, Mary instructed the family on how best to treat Frank, saving his life and nursing him back to health. Mary often spoke of seeing Dr. Stevens' deceased children in heaven, who were about her age. Mary said she spent much time with them, often joining them as they traveled to Dr. Stevens' home. The doctor's late daughter, Emma Angela, sought to visit through Lorancy and go home with her father to Wisconsin to visit her mother and the rest of her family for a week. Mary asked Mr. and Mrs. Roff if she should let Emma Stevens have the body for a week. No one thought it was advisable.
The family was like, let's just keep this high strangeness contained to one dead daughter. Our Christmas letter this year is already going to be 5 pages long, and Aunt Irma isn't going to understand any of it. Let's just button this up and call it good. No.
That would be a difficult explanation to the Venoms. If something should happen to Lorancy while in Wisconsin.
Right.
It's like, well, while Lorancy was visiting the rickety old cheese factory.
As Mary? No, as Emma. Wait, who?
On one occasion, as the Roff family entertained a room full of guests, Mary entered the room and took the last remaining chair next to a gentleman named Mr. Steele. Mary voluntarily disembodied herself, leaving the girl's form like a corpse with her head resting against the shoulder of her friend, and immediately took control of Mr. Steele. Steele turned in a jovial way and laughed at her unconscious body with a pleasant jest at the friend who supported her. She then returned to her own proper body and seemed to enjoy the trick that she had played. Which is a great parlor trick.
Indeed.
Got to learn that one.
Right. Well, if you're not going to have fun with spiritual possession, why bother?
Certainly beats the coin behind the ear trick.
Which I still haven't mastered.
As the time drew near for the restoration of Lorancy to her body and home, she slowly began impressing her presence upon her own body.
On Sunday, May 19th, around 4 p.m., Mr. Roff and Mary were sitting in the parlor. Henry Venom, Lorancy's brother, was visiting but in another room. Mary left control, and Lorancy took full possession. Henry was called in, and she hugged him, kissed and wept over him, causing everyone present to weep too. Mr. Roff asked Lorancy if she could stay until Henry could go home and bring her mother. She said no, but that she would come back. Mrs. Venom was brought within an hour, and on her arrival, Lorancy came into full control again. Mother and daughter embraced and kissed each other and wept until all present shed tears of sympathy.
Wow. That is some strange Freaky Friday stuff going on.
Right. It's so emotional, though.
Yeah.
2 days later, on the morning of May 21st, Mr. Roff wrote, Mary is to leave the body of Rancy today, about 11 o'clock, so she says. She's bidding neighbors and friends goodbye. Rancy is to return home for the day. Mary came from her room upstairs where she was sleeping at 10 o'clock last night and laid down with us, hugged and kissed us, and cried because she must bid us goodbye, telling us to give all her pictures, marbles, and cards, and the 25 cents Miss Venom had given her to Rancy, and had us promise to visit Rancy often. She talked most lovingly about the separation to take place, and the most beautiful was her talk about heaven and her home. When saying goodbye to her sister, Mary said, I will come in spirit as close to you as I can and comfort you in sorrow, and you will sometimes feel me near.
The next day, Dr. Stevens received a letter from Mr. Roff, who wrote, Now I write you that, at 11:30 a.m., Minerva arrived at my office with Rancy Venom, asking me to take her home, which I did. She called me Mr. Roff, and talked with me as a young girl not familiar with my acquaintance. I asked her how things appeared for her, if they seemed natural. She said it seemed like a dream to her. She met her parents and brothers in a very affectionate manner, hugging and kissing each one in tears of gladness. She clasped her arms around her father's neck a long time, fairly smothering him with kisses. I saw her father just now, 11 o'clock. He says that she has been perfectly natural and seems entirely well. On July 9th, Dr. Stevens received a letter from Lorancy's mother. It said, Dear friend, Lorancy Venom is perfectly and entirely well, and perfectly natural. Lorancy has been smarter, more intelligent, more industrious, more womanly, and more polite than ever before her sickness. We give the credit of her complete cure and restoration to her family, to Dr. E.W. Stevens, and to Mr. and Mrs. Roff. We firmly believe that had she remained home, she would have died, or we would have been obliged to send her to the insane asylum, and if so, that she would have died there, and that further, that I could not have lived but a short time with the care and trouble devolving on me. Several of the relatives of Mary Lorancy, including ourselves, now believe that she was cured by spirit power, and that Mary Roff controlled the girl, Mrs. Lorinda Venom. 8 years later, Lorancy married a local farmer named George Bining, and 2 years later, they moved to Kansas. They bought a farm there and had 11 children.
Wow. Aja Roff and his wife received hundreds of letters from believers and skeptics alike.
I'll bet.
After the story of possession was printed on the front page of the Watseka newspaper. After a year of constant hounding and scorn from neighbors, they left Watseka and they too moved to Kansas. 7 years later, they returned to Watseka to live with Minerva and her husband. They died of old age and are buried in Watseka.
The Venom stayed on in Watseka for many years, but after the death of her husband, Lorinda Venom moved to Kansas with Lorancy and her children. Lorancy died in the late 1940s while she was in California visiting one of her daughters. Dr. Stevens lectured on the Watseka Wonder for 8 years before dying in Chicago in 1886. Mary Roff was never heard from again.
Such a sweet, supernatural tale of redemption and grief, closure, and healing.
Yeah.
I mean, here are two girls. They're strangers in life. They cross paths across the ether to help each other.
Yeah.
One given the opportunity to visit with her family without the past pain and suffering, for precious farewells and healing the regrets of past mistakes, while restoring the life of the other so that she might live the life the other never could.
Yeah, it's an amazing story.
So emotional.
We'll end this tale with a letter from Mary's sister, Minerva. It reads, "My angel sister says she is going away from us again soon, but says she will be with us often. She says Lorancy is a beautiful girl, says she sees her nearly every day, and we do know that she is getting better every day. Oh, the lessons that are being taught us are worth treasures of rare diamonds. They are stamped upon the mind so firmly that heaven and earth shall pass away before one jot or one tittle shall be forgotten. I have learned so much that is grand and beautiful. I cannot express it. I am dumb." A few days ago, Mary was caressing her father and mother, and they became a little tired of it, and asked why she hugged and kissed them. She sorrowfully looked at them and said, "Oh, Pa and Ma, I want to kiss you while I have lips to kiss you with, and hug you while I have arms to hug you with, for I'm going back to heaven before long, and then I can only be with you in spirit, and you will not always know when I come. I cannot love you as I can now. Oh, how much I love you all."
You know what I love about this story? Whether you believe the details or not as to what happened, in the end, it all worked out. No one was swindled out of their family fortune. No one pretended to be a psychic investigator so they could get a swinging movie deal. It didn't turn out that grandma was dead in the attic for 12 years. No crazy family secrets, just a nice, heartwarming tale of spiritual possession and the two families that came together to help a young girl, and everyone healed in the process.
Yeah, it's a very rare occurrence that you get the uplifting paranormal story.
Right? We have to cherish this one.
Absolutely, absolutely. And we hope that you've enjoyed it as much as we have enjoyed telling it.
It's phenomenal. It really is very remarkable.
That wraps up another edition of Odd Tonic. Please subscribe to us so you never miss a show, and leave us a review so that your kindred odd may find us as well.
We'll be back next week with more weird history, strange science, and a healthy helping of paranormal goodness.
This is, dear guest, goodbye for now. But remember, if you ever find yourself at a charming dinner party and you suddenly feel your body possessed by discarnate spirits with voices speaking through you that are not your own, don't worry.
It's just us.
Good night.